Hi, Matt from Modern Samurai Martial Arts here, and today we're going to talk about self-defense for van life. Now, if you're a traveler, if your work takes you to places remotely, if you choose to do that for yourself as a hobby, as a way of life, one of the things about the van community is a lot of reason why people do it is so they can get away, so they can get into nature, so they can get into the wild. And so for all of those reasons, we need to take a look at the other aspect of it, which is the safety aspect of it, because unfortunately there are dangers that lurk. They're nowhere near as bad as people make out for the most part, but there's always a risk. So let's have a look at that. But before I do, please like the page, subscribe, leave us a comment about anything that we talk about today, because there's a lot of misinformation around this particular topic, and there's a lot of things circulating in the ether that will actually get you into more trouble. So this is one of the reasons why I wanted to have this conversation. Now, why would you want to listen to me? Okay, so let's start at the beginning. So this is me in my day job. I own a full-time martial arts gym. I've competed on a world stage. I've trained security personnel and worked frontline security for many years. I've trained NHS staff. I'm certified, licensed and qualified in all kinds of physical intervention, communication, control and restraint, use of force laws, and so on and so forth. In fact, I train professional people in these very subjects. So much so that I've written several books on the subject, and I regularly speak as an expert, subject matter expert on these particular issues, so on and so forth. Okay, but when I'm not doing these things and when I'm not having that side of me, then this is what I do. So this is my van, and this is how I spend a lot of my time. I like to be out in the middle of nowhere. I like to be off in the woods. I like to be away from people. And so when I'm doing those things, there are certain steps that I will take, and there are certain things that I would recommend to other people. So some of you guys, you may think, well, okay, you're a martial artist, you're this, that, and the other, but you don't really know a lot about van life. And to be honest, no, I'm not a van lifer, not permanently, but I have been in and around this environment since I was a small kid. We used to go camping when I was a child probably because we didn't really have a lot of money to do anything else, and I just fell in love with it. And I've always been a great big fan of getting out in nature and being part of nature. So right, so let's actually have a look then at what we're talking about now. I saw a Facebook post the other day, and there was this big long list of things somebody had put up about self-defense. And there was this big long list of things, of all these things you should do. Carry a knife, carry an axe, carry a great big torch, use pepper spray, stab them in the eye, rip their throat out. My goodness me, it got really, really ridiculous. And it made me stop and think. And I thought, you know what? The truth is, a lot of these things will actually make a bad situation worse and get you into a whole heap of trouble. So I thought, let's actually be sensible about this, and let's have a look at this properly. So what we're going to do is just go over a few little bits first, and then we're going to hopefully have a bit of a conversation in and around it. So the first thing I'm going to explain is this. Everyone has the right to protect themselves. So under common law, everybody has the right and duty to take reasonable steps. Now, what I'm using here are basically slides from previous PowerPoints that are used to deliver to professional frontline working staff that have to know about the laws and use of force and have to be able to justify the actions that they take. So this isn't made up, this isn't pretend, this is the actual thing, not read off a blog, not got from a YouTube video. This is the actual genuine knowledge that we deliver to professionals. Okay, so everyone has the right to protect themselves. Okay, and that includes the use of reasonable force. Now, are we expected to measure niceties? Now, the truth of that is no, because it's very, very hard to actually figure out where that lies. And so what is reasonable, what is necessary, what is proportionate? We're going to look at that now in a moment. And so essentially, those are the things we want to be weighing our actions up against. So when people say, oh, I carry an axe, okay, well, if you're being attacked by 4 armed murderers, then maybe, chopping somebody up with an axe is okay. But if somebody's just banging on your door because you're on their land and they want you to move, perhaps an axe is a bit extreme, yeah? And then the next thing is the preemptive strike? Can striking first be lawful? And again, the answer to that is yes. And so I tend to use the term of preemptive action as opposed to a preemptive strike, because it doesn't have to be punching somebody in the nose or hurting somebody. A preemptive action could be something as simple as just deciding, you know what, this is not a good vibe, and starting the van, moving somewhere else. Okay, so you can strike first. However, again, it has to be justified, and you have to be able to explain why you did what you did. Okay, so when we're looking at this, then we weigh it up against three main things. Okay, so whatever action you take, in the eyes of the law, it's weighed up against these three particular words, which are reasonable, proportionate, and necessary. So you have to ask yourself, was it necessary? Were alternatives sought? Okay, was it practical to, say, leave the situation? All right, so for it to be necessary, the threat of harm must be imminent. Okay, so it needs to be right there in the moment. Was it proportionate? So again, was the use of force used proportionate to the threat that was being offered? So again, if we go back to that axe scenario, if somebody's just come to bang on your door because you're trespassing, or they think that you're doing something else wrong and they just want to vent, waving an axe at them is probably not the cleverest idea. And then, was it reasonable? Okay, so you always expected to use the minimum amount of force necessary. So what that basically means is weigh it up against yourself. So if you're having a conversation around something that somebody did, and you say to yourself, okay, do you know what? In those circumstances, I could probably see myself doing similar. Well, that would be a barometer for whether or not you think something is reasonable. And so it has to be decided. Obviously, if something happens and it gets taken to court, it has to be decided by a group of your peers, as they call them. And so they will decide whether the action you took was reasonable in their eyes. And so you have to consider all of these things, and you have to weigh all of these things up. And it's really important that you do that, because if you take an action and it's well overboard with regards to use of force, with regards to the legalities, then you're actually going to find yourself in a lot more trouble. And here's an interesting point to think about. All right, none of us want to go to prison, really, for the most part. None of us want to find that our liberty is taken from us, for the most part. None of us want to find ourselves confined. That's why that's the whole reason why we go out in the van. That's the whole reason why we're in the vans. That's the whole reason why we get out into nature. We do not want to be confined. So the last thing that you want to do is take an action that's going to almost guarantee that for a period of time. If you get a prison sentence and you get locked up, that is the end worst case scenario. And so you do not want to be in that position. Okay, so if it's life and limb, and if you absolutely have to do something, fair enough. But only at that point can you start looking at, sort of major uses of force. Okay, so now what we're going to do is have a quick look at the offensive weapons. Now, again, when I look at the forums and I look at the Facebook posts and I look at things like that, I see all these people saying, get one of those, get one of these, do this, do the other. Now, bear in mind, I'm having this conversation from the UK. So we're not talking about the US. We're not talking about guns and things, although they do come into the equation in the sense that it's exactly the same principle pretty much. So as an example of that, if you are in a place where a gun is allowed, for the most part, you can't just shoot somebody with it. There has to be a reason why you did so. And so the same applies. But over here in the UK, we've got very, very serious laws with regards to offensive weapons. And there are an awful lot of things that you can't have and you can't carry and you can't own. Now, bear in mind, they changed the rules again earlier this year to make it even harder. And so you can't even own certain things, never mind wave them about at somebody, okay? So it's illegal to carry a weapon in a public place. Really important to understand that. Carrying a weapon in case someone else attacks you is also illegal. So as a defense, as a legal defense, that's not going to work, okay? All right, now, an offensive weapon is classified as an article made or adapted for use to cause injury to the person. Now, that's really important, because you see a lot of people on these sites saying, oh, well, you can make up this mix of chili powder and vinegar and, lemon juice and all these other things. You can make your own pepper spray. You can modify torches and things and adapt some mechanical things and tools that you have in the van. All those kind of stuffs, no. Because once you do that, then you can get yourself into serious trouble. All right. So what we're looking at here is just being realistic with regards to the law. All right, and what you should be able to do and not do. All right, now it's an offence to have an offensive weapon in a public place without lawful authority or reasonable excuse. So if you're having a picnic, as an example, if you're there and you're out and you've got a bread knife and you're chopping up bread and your family's there, that's a reasonable excuse, isn't it? However, if you're walking through the woods at 3 in the morning and you've got said bread knife, then that would probably need an explanation. And so it's just being sensible like that and making sure things are in the right place. Okay, so there is a penalty involved, although, truth be told, it doesn't seem to be enforced that much if you read the papers and you see all of that thing. But that doesn't mean to say that, you know, you can just run amok with it. Quite the opposite, because quite often I find it's the good guys that actually cop the worst of it. So, okay, so when we understand that, we can start making sense of it. So the same applies then. It's an offence to have an article which is a blade which is sharply pointed in a public place. All right, so folding pen knives are exempt, providing the cutting edge of the blade is no longer than 3 inches. All right, again, that's important because a lot of people, they'll have locking knives, they'll have knives that they can actually lock the blade out, totally illegal now, and things like that. So it's just something to consider and be aware of. Now, what I would suggest is that you have a look at the laws of the land where you are. If you're in the UK, government has the website there, there's all these lists, and it tells you everything you need to know. It's just being compliant with that. Okay, so that's a basic overview of the law. Now, we hear this wonderful phrase quite often, it's better to be judged by 12 than carried by 6 and all the rest of it. And do you know what? There's a certain truth to that. But let's be real, let's be honest, okay? One of the things I spend a lot of time doing is talking about the psychology of violence. I don't just train it physically, I train people mentally as well. And this is where this is important, okay? So when you start having this conversation around I sleep with a knife, I sleep with an axe, I've got this, that, and the other, firstly, do you honestly think and do you honestly believe that you are the type of person that could do that to somebody? Okay, think about it. Think about it very seriously. Do you honestly believe you could stick that object into another human being's flesh? Okay, and if you're in any doubt, then you've got to be really, really concerned, because there are people out there that will do it without second thought. And if you're facing one of those, they will take that from you and they will use it against you. So you will actually make a very bad situation worse again. All right, worth thinking about. Now, let's talk about some of the types of weapons that people mention. Okay, so people mention a torch, and they'll go, get a great big 4, 5, 6 cell Magalite torch. Now, these are like a club. They're great big, long, hefty things. The big ones are a couple of foot long. Now, they're great. However, you have to be concerned about the reality of where you are. You know, so if you've got a large object that you have to swing, whether it be a bat, a torch, a hammer, you're going to struggle in a confined space to actually be able to swing that and get any momentum through it. So it's not a weapon for a confined space. Okay, just something to consider. And also, again, if people assume, so if they think that you have that as a weapon, not as a torch, remember it falls back into that category of offensive weapons and it can be taken as such. So better to sort of consider that and get something a bit more sensible. Where a torch is a really good idea is actually to get a very high lumen small torch, and you can then use that rather than a clubbing device. It becomes a blinding device, so you can actually have that. It lights up really, really bright, and you can momentarily point that at somebody to effect some kind of escape or maneuver that you have to do. Okay, there are all sorts of tactical pens and tactical batons and tactical knives and things like that. Some of them have glass breakers on them, seatbelt cutters, all kind of those kind of things. A good quality tactical pen and a decent torch are not bad ideas, being truthful. Okay, much better than the giant sort of Maglite kind of stuff. Okay, again, when we talk about knives and we talk about axes and we talk about things like that, the reality of it is that they are messy, they are ugly. It takes a special kind of person to actually use one of those properly, and that, you know, that's a worry. So it's just something to consider there. All right, now if we talk about sprays, now there's a couple of different types of sprays. We're not going to list them all, but if we look at them and we put them in classes. So essentially what you've got is deterrent sprays, marker sprays, and then sprays that will actually cause harm. All right. So if you look at deterrent sprays, now you can make some of those yourself, as we mentioned earlier on. You can sort of homemade DIY some. You can get a few household products and items that will work for that. Okay. There are things like red stopper spray, that kind of thing. And what they do is they mark the individual so that they can be found at a later date. They forensically mark them with paint. And so that's a way for people to identify moving forward so they can be caught. Okay. But that doesn't stop them in the moment necessarily. And then the third one are things like pepper spray, that kind of stuff. Again, you can DIY things that are relatively similar. Now, again, I would caution against some of these things because A, there's a real risk of you getting into trouble for owning these things, and B, in a small confined space like a van, you're just as likely to suffer the consequences of that spray as the person you're trying to spray it at. So you want to make sure that you're not doing that inside the van, inside a small vehicle, inside a small space. Okay, it's just understanding how some of these things work and the best way to use them. And so, right, if we look at that and we go, okay, so we've had a look at, axes and things and knives, and we've had a look at torches, and we've had a look at some of mechanical things like screwdrivers and, wheel nut things and stuff like that. All right, and then that leaves a dog. The amount of times I've heard people say, get a dog. All right, now look, I want to show you something first and foremost. Okay? This is my dog, right? Oh, he's over there. Okay, he's an absolute beauty. He's very big, very loud, very muscular, huge set of chompers on him. Now, the thing is with him is that if somebody came into the van, if somebody tried to break in, there is absolutely no question that he would defend that. Okay. Now, that's a risk that I have taken on purposefully because I understand the breed, I understand the training, I understand what it is that I have that is my responsibility. And so you've got to take all of these factors into account. I don't live full time in the van. If I did, I would think twice about having a dog that size. I would also very much think twice about having a trained dog, because if you train a dog to be a protection animal, if you train a dog to defend you, you do have essentially a weapon that thinks for itself, that will make its own choices. And so you have to be very, very careful with that. You have to make sure it's done correctly and maintained correctly. But for the most part, for most people, here's something to consider. Number one, a lot of people have a belief in that animal. They believe that the dog will do more than it will. Most dogs won't actually defend you like you think they will. Okay. And secondly, why would you want to do that anyway, unless you absolutely had to? Because here's the thing. I like my dog. I'm very fond of my dog. In fact, I would go so far as to say, me and my dog have a very, what I like to think is a special bond. Now, what that means is, number one, I would never want to see him hurt. I wouldn't want to see somebody hurt him. Number two is I would not want to put that dog in a position where he had to act, and then the law would say he is now dangerous and would want to have him put down. I do not want to run the risk of my dog being put down for defending me. So when we talk about having a dog, it's not necessarily a bad idea as a deterrent, because that loud bark, that movement, that would send most people away from causing any issues, right? Which is great, because that's what we want. But just bear in mind that as a protection device, there are limitations and not necessarily something you can rely on. So when we talk about that, dogs are fantastic. Get a dog, but get one as a companion, as a friend. Get one as an explorer buddy. Get one as something that's going to spend, time with you and build a relationship with. Don't get one because, you don't feel physically capable of handling yourself. That's completely the wrong reason to get it, Okay, now, that's the next thing we're going to have a little talk about. We're going to talk about the wonders of martial arts training. Okay, so you hear all the time people say, go do some self-defense, go do some martial arts, right? I've spent a lifetime doing this stuff. I've got multiple black belts. I've got multiple trophies, world championship medals and things, and I've trained in all kinds of stuff. So I've dedicated my life to doing it. And I'm a big chap, I'm 6'2", I'm 18 odd stone. I'm not a small guy by any stretch. Now, here's the thing. One of the things you hear about a lot is Krav Maga, and people say, hey, go do some Krav Maga. You'll be, a killing machine in a week. Not entirely true, you won't. Okay, but craft, depending on who's teaching it, can actually be a good choice because it gives a little bit of sort of realism and it's not sort of sport based. However, the truth is, for the most part, most self defense courses don't give you enough to actually make you proficient, okay, but it's a start. And quite a lot of martial arts systems are actually designed to be a martial art, not to be a self defense system. So that's not to take away from them, but it's just understanding what you're doing. So if you're going to do some physical skills, just think about the outcomes and think about the way you want to train. So if you think about, well, what are the likely things that would happen to me? What are the likely threats I would face? Then that's the kind of things you want to be training for. And so if the self defense martial arts system that you're looking at doesn't cater for that, then not really going to be necessarily the thing for you. So worth looking at. Okay. So realistically, there are a number of things that you can do proactively. So a lot of it is common sense. It sounds odd, but it's true. So as an example of that, when you're looking at park ups, take a look if you can in the day, have a little recce round, make sure it's all okay. If you get some kind of weird spidey sense saying not a good place to be, listen to it. Normally it's there for a reason, you know. When you park, I know we all want the Instagram photo, yeah? I mean, I look fantastic in a bikini, so I want to make sure I've got those shots going out the back door, okay? But the truth is, I'm actually more concerned about where I park and how I park as a means to escape. So if I've got to get into the driver's seat and drive away in the wee small hours because there's a problem, I want to be able to just go. I don't want to be having to do a 6-point turn in the mud to try and get out. So there's that. I'll obviously keep all the seats clear so that you can do that. Keep the keys in a place where you can access them. All right. Some other things that I've done, I'm not going to go into great details on all the things like this, but there's a few little things. So as an example, the front of my van has some bull bars on it. The back of my van has a large tow-in hitch and a step. Now those are there for a good reason because both of those means I can, if I have to, I can pull forward into another vehicle and physically shift it. I can reverse and do the same with little damage to my vehicle. Also, big LED lights front, back and side with a little switch by the door so that you can turn those on if you feel you need to. So you can actually light up the area around the van. So those are just a couple of little things that you could do. There are apps available which are really good. So there's an app called What 3 Words. If you haven't got that, it might be something worth looking at. And that can pinpoint you down to about a meter. And it works on this grid system that it's 3 words and it will pinpoint you and triangulate your position from that. Really, really good. Another one that you might want to consider is a thing called HollyGuard. Now that is a sort of personal protection app. It has an alarm system. It can tell your friends or family where you are and things, and it's an interesting one. So that's called HollyGuard. There are other ones available, but that one seems to be pretty okay. So there's apps like that you can use. There is common sense in regards to how you do things. Okay. And another really important one is just be nice. Oddly enough, just be polite and courteous, right? You'll be amazed what a difference that makes. As I said at the start, I teach communication, I teach conflict management, and it's amazing how many people make this mistake where they meet confrontation with more confrontation and it just escalates, okay? So be nice, be pleasant, be polite, understand that whatever it is that person is in a bad mood about, okay, from their point of view, they think it's valid and it's understanding that. Or it may be that it's a bunch of people that just want to do their drugs or have a party or, you know, have sex in the corner. All of these wonderful things that you find when you're trying to park up overnight, all of these things that people do in car parks and woodland spaces, basically they want to do what they want to do, and for whatever reason you're interfering with that. So it's worth just bearing that in mind when it comes to trying to resolve some of these conflicts. All right, now here's the thing. For the most part, this fear, this anxiety is actually worse than the reality itself, because for the most part it's okay. These things don't happen every day to everybody. They do happen and they are a real threat, but it's a small percentage of the whole. And with a few sensible precautions, with a few decent ways of doing things, and a few common sense decisions, you can negate an awful lot of those threats. Okay, so guys, I hope this has helped. I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope it's made some sense. And I really hope that if I don't see you on this channel, feel free to join me over on Instagram, YouTube, on the Adventures of Fat Boy, which is the one I do with my van and things like that. And hopefully one of these days soon, I'll actually see you out on the road somewhere and we can say hi. So cheers, guys.